New memoirs by two TNT authors explore issues of identity, family, and belonging across borders. Barbara Jenkins, author of The Stranger Who Was Myself, and Ira Mathur, author of Love the Dark Days, join host Andre Bagoo for a conversation about finding where you belong. Part of the NGC Bocas Lit Fest's 2022 Season of Independence, celebrating Trinidad and Tobago's 60th anniversary as an independent nation.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's conversation with Barbara Jenkins and Ira Mathur. Today's conversation is going to be under the theme Coming and Going. And that's because these two writers have written incredible new memoirs that are all about voyages between, away, to, and from different spaces. My name is Andre Bagoo, and I'll be the host for today's conversation. So a little bit about our writers. Barbara Jenkins is a Trinidadian writer who started writing 10 years ago at the age of 70. For her efforts thus far, she has been awarded the Holic Orvon Caribbean Writers Prize, the Guyana Prize for Literature, and the Caribbean Region's Commonwealth Short Story Prize. She is now the author of 3 books, including the acclaimed short story collection Sick Transit Wagon, the novel De Writer's Place, which was shortlisted for the Royal Society of Literature Christopher Bland Prize, and now the memoir The Stranger Who Was Myself, which is perhaps one of the most powerful and acute portraits of life in Port-of-Spain, Trinidad during the colonial era. A portrait all the more mesmerizing given its microscopic attention to detail and its unrelenting gaze at the epic and monumental forces that have bent Caribbean society into its present shape. Ira Mathur is an Indian-born multimedia Trinidad-based journalist and Trinidad Guardian columnist, and MAT president, incidentally, who has been the recipient of 9 regional awards for excellence in journalism. In 2013 and 2014, she was a finalist for the Holic Orvon Prize. In 2018, Mathur was shortlisted for the Britport Short Story Prize and the Lorraine Hemingway Short Story Prize. In 2019, she was longlisted for that year's Johnson and Amoy Achong Caribbean Writers Prize. She is the 2018 second prize winner of the Caribbean-based small literary competition for short fiction. Love the Dark Days, her memoir, is a moving and often surprising account of a life straddling many boundaries, a book that challenges us to reconsider narrative making in the Caribbean space, as well as the Caribbean's storied literary precursors. Welcome to you both. So I'm going to invite you to give us just a little taste of your books, and we're going to start with Barbara.
Oh, thank you, Andre, for that lovely introduction. And
Barbara?
to Bocas Lit. Hello, can you hear me? Yeah, thank you, Andre, for that delightful introduction, and to Bocas Lit Fest for hosting this occasion. The theme is comings and goings, so I'll read a little bit about going first. It's about when I left Trinidad for the first time. In mid-1961, almost 2 years after I left school, the government invited applicants with suitable qualifications to apply for a slew of scholarships. There'd be interviews, and successful candidates would be contracted to work for the government for 5 years upon completion of the course. Most were scholarships to teach. I was awarded a scholarship to study geography. Where to go to study geography? I knew nothing of universities. Nobody I knew of except doctors whom I didn't know personally, had been to university. Well, I wasn't anxious about lacking information or anything like that. I write this here to show how skimpy was my knowledge, how few were my resources. In any case, not knowing any better, I guess I left it up to the scholarship awarding people to make arrangements and let me know what they had fixed. Towards the end of that year, I got a message that I must come into the scholarship office in downtown Port of Spain. Somehow, I'm remembering that this was in the building called Federal House, the local headquarters of the West Indies Federation. There, Mr. Peter Carr asked me where I had decided to go and study. I hadn't decided. I didn't know how to decide. He said, "Which country?" I didn't know there were places one could go to study apart from England and Ireland. And as I'd had enough of the Irish, I decided England. He took out a book, opened it, and turned it sideways so that we could both look at the page together. It was a list of universities set out in a table with subjects along the top. The list ran Aberystwyth, Bangor, Cambridge, Durham, all offered geography to an honours degree. I didn't go further down the list as I knew that none of the other places would mean anything to me except the obvious Oxford and London. So I asked for an atlas. As it turned out, the book had a map with the location of the universities. I chose Aberystwyth because it was at the top of the list and because it was by the seaside. We must have filled in some forms, but I have no recollection of any of the formalities we engaged in once I'd chosen our university. I got a message early the following year that I was once again to go to the scholarship office to pick up a note to take to the travel agent to book my passage to England. The next day, I went to Lazary and Sampson, shipping agents. I told the person who was serving me that I wanted to get a boat ticket to England. He asked when I wished to travel. I said, I wasn't sure. He said, "Are you going to study?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Then you should get there by the middle of September." I nodded. I didn't know this until he said so. He pulled out a set of folded papers with fine print and ran a finger along the line saying, and then he said, "We have the SSRT leaving 31st of August, a Friday. It will dock in Southampton in good time. What class do you want?" I guess this wasn't a timetabling question about me choosing a group of children to teach, but I didn't know what this meant. So I said, "I don't know." And I showed him the note I'd got from the scholarship office. He looked up some more stuff and said, "You can get a student discount. Let me see what I can give you for this." I said, "Thanks." He did some working out and then said, "I can book you first class." I said, "Thanks." I had understood very little of what had transpired. There was some talk about cabin number and deck and fore and aft and port and starboard and berth and up and lower, but by then I was completely lost. There was one thing that I understood completely. I had a ticket to go to England. 2 months later, the 10-member West Indies Federation fell apart when Jamaica left, and Eric Williams pronounced that 1 from 10 leaves North. Jamaica declared itself independent, and we did too, with a date announced for a departure from colonial status to independent nationhood. When I heard the date, I felt a chill. You know that story about Saul becoming Paul on the road to Damascus? And he saw a blinding flash of light and fell and saw the light. Was this coincidence of date saying to me, "You are becoming independent on the same day as your island becomes independent"? So was this a double dose of freedom? And what would it mean? Of course, the paradox of my willingly going to the former mother country when my homeland was departing did not strike me at the time. I must have been too confused by the uncertainties of what might lie ahead to take any philosophical stance on it. I was looking with a kind of passive helplessness at the unstoppable days rolling by one, to the day when I'd be leaving home, friends, the only life I knew. I was unprepared for this voyage in the dark, and I knew it. There was no one in my circle whom I can consult about what to take, what I would find there, what I would need. So I packed what I already had: my clothes, my little red address book, my certificates, and my acceptance letter from the university. I'm going to skip a little bit to come closer to the end now. In the week before I was to leave, as insurmountable as a pillar of salt, I watched the arc of my days from sunrise to sunset turn irretrievably, the hands of the clock moving one tick, one tock at a time towards my departure. I did not look back at what I was leaving. I did look with new recognition at everything I knew, but hadn't taken the time to really seeing anew every place that mattered, but I hadn't bothered to claim everyone I loved that I hadn't realized I did till that moment when the heaviness of imminent parting weighed on me. So how could anyone know what it meant to me? I never said, never understood all that was me and mine and overlooked and taken for granted and dismissed as ordinary. I think I'll stop there.
Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you, Barbara, for that incredibly moving extract. Ira, would you like to give us a sample of your book as well?
I think as the theme is comings and goings, maybe I'll go against your wishes a little bit and do something about the time we were about to leave India with my grandmother to go to Tobago for the first time. Yeah, as children. Angel and I start crying as the piano is taken away by 4 men, leaving only the piano stool with all the sheet music inside it. Kaja hugs Angel, tears falling into Angel's dark hair, her frail hands around Angel's waist. Don't cry, girls. Pop it, Angel, don't cry. Only 2 days, then we fly. Only 2 days, then we fly, says Angel in Bari Mummy's voice. Breaking free from Kaja, she starts running, her chubby fingers making piano-playing movements in the air as she wades into the old brocade curtains from Majid Castle that have been locked in a trunk since 1947. I'm surprised to see tears in Bari Mummy's eyes when the ayahs line up to say goodbye to us. She hands them little envelopes with money. Don't worry, you can stay here. You'll get a monthly salary. Just don't give them away to your damn men. Angel is shouting, fairy dust, fairy dust. She's spinning in circles in the curtains, watching with shrieking delight the brocade disintegrate into bejeweled smoke as it spread into the room and float out of the window. Oh God, Mama's curtains falling apart in bits, the last of Majid Castle. Mama, Papa, all gone, all gone. Our laughter smothers her wail as she draws our faces close to hers. I can't tell if Bari Mummy is laughing or crying, blinded by the swirling ascending dust. Briefly, 17 Rest House Road is a goblet of electric blue light. We're leaving Rest House Road for the airport, our suitcases strapped on the top of the taxi. We stare through the back window until the house is out of sight. Bari Mummy looks straight ahead, wearing oversized sunglasses. She puts Angel on her lap and says, "Don't be sad, darling. Everything will be the same when we return. We're going on an adventure on an island. We will go to the seaside. Would you like that, my darlings?" Angel puts her thumb in her mouth. We would go anywhere with Bari Mummy. If she can leave Rest House Road behind, so can we. Maybe, finally, we could be a proper family with all of us together. Bari Mummy sings, "Just Pop It and me, and Angel makes 3. Together we'll be in a sweet heaven." In Bombay, we stay at the Taj, where the manager seems to know Bari Mummy well. Angel and I are open-mouthed at this, at Bari Mummy in imposing black silk and pearls, with her usual crimson lipstick. Pan exchanged for cigarettes with a long holder, commanding even here amidst the gleaming marble floors, high ceilings, and unending stairwells. She smokes, crossing and uncrossing her legs, telling hovering livery bearers to heat her milk Take this away, bring that, crumpling fine linen as casually as if she did this every day. No tourists, no strangers in that plush Victorian tea room with a view of India Gate and the ocean. She plays some Bach, always that Brandenburg concerto, and closes with Dr. Zhivago, her eyes closed. In India, we'd heard that London was always damp with a cold that got into your bones. I wanted to know how that felt, but we landed in London to stifling heat, nothing like Bangalore, cool all year round. The streets looked ordered and bare, the city as magical as a storybook. Harrods, Big Ben, the Houses of Parliament, the Thames, Buckingham Palace, Hyde Park, the Victorian Albert Museum. Bari Mummy points them out from the taxi in the day and at night when she takes us round the city. We stay at the Dorchester for 2 nights. Again, Bari Mummy behaves as if she's a permanent resident of the hotel. It's strange not having the ayahs to help us all to dress. As she looks into Park Lane from our hotel window, she tells us, "You know, girls, I once had a flat here in Knightsbridge. I really wish I hadn't sold it. Everything worth having is finished." We take a taxi to Golders Green, where she meets a relative from Hyderabad, another great-grandchild of Sir Afsars. There are plenty of them. I'm starving. The lady offers us sandwiches. Remembering my manners, I refuse, expecting her to press them upon me, but she accepts my no thank you and moves away with the tray. The same thing happens to Angel and Bari Mummy. Afterwards, eating at the hotel, Bari Mummy says, "They lose all their grace when they come to the West. They've forgotten their courtly manners." On the tube back, I'm struck at the sight of a couple kissing passionately, wondering if love can be this open. I know it as a dark secret thing. I stand staring at them until Bari Mummy pulls me away roughly. Shall I read on a bit, or is that, I think
Thank
3
you.
minutes
Thank
is...
you for that. That was wonderful. That was wonderful, Ira. And thank you both
Thank
for those
you.
incredible extracts, which
Thank you.
actually underline how these two books are in some ways diametrically opposed to one another. We have, Ira, your book deals with a world of I think it's safe to say a world of privilege. And Barbara, your book deals with a world in which people are just trying to survive from day to day and formulating dreams and hopes for themselves. And yet both books have a lot that is overlapping, or a lot of similarities. They are both incredible portraits of Trinidad. So I wanted to ask both of you a little bit about the origins of these books. I wanted to find out, since you're both fiction writers as well, and I believe, Ira, you have a novel that's forthcoming, how did these memoirs come to be? When did you know that you were going to write a memoir? And then when did you know that the memoir was going to be about not just you, but about so much more, all of these societies within which you all have resided? Barbara, let's begin with you.
You started off by saying that I started writing at 70, 10 years ago. Do the math. I've lived for 80 years. What do I have except what I have lived? Read a lot, of course. My whole life has been reading, really, never writing. But it seemed right to start this because, the sort of like wanting to get things off your chest before it's too late kind of feeling. And I felt if I didn't do it now, when? So it wasn't so much moving from fiction. I've only written one novel. It was writing what I lived. But I think I needed some kind of a trigger, a starting point, an impetus, or whatever. And I think it was Walcott's Love After Love poem that did it for me. It resonated so strongly with reaching a point in your life where you look at what you have and examine it What is this I have? What is this portrait? What is this feast? What is this book on the bookshelf? And having that sort of mental framework to frame my life, I thought, I'll just start. And I did.
Ira?
Does that answer?
Yes.
I think for me, it was a couple of things. My grandmother told me stories as a way of holding her past. So when I was 6 years old, I felt I was 600 years old. Because she never spoke, she spoke of time in centuries, seconds in centuries. So there was always talk of what Aurangzeb did, this emperor, and what happened in the Holy Quran, thousands of years ago. So it was always big stories set across a very vast landscape. So when I came to Trinidad and I had children, and eventually she came as well when she was dying and ill, I realized around the time of having children and looking after her that I was starting to forget my Hindi, I was starting to forget my Urdu, and I was starting to forget. And that got me to the question of why should I remember? Why should I remember this old world? And she was still telling me stories. And as a journalist, I am so deeply steeped into Trinidad society. I consider Trinidad my home now. I want to be buried in Trinidad. India is the place that I was born, but Trinidad is my home. And I think being in Trinidad and being amidst the people of Trinidad, I started to feel a very similar kind of indignation about colonialism. My mother actually remembers a time in India where they used to say, no dogs or Indians, and that rage started to come up within me. And I also thought about the huge area of darkness that slavery and indentured labor brought to the minds of the people who were brought to Trinidad, because they were forced, in order to adapt to a new society, somewhat brutally, to forget their language and also forget the towns and cities that they've come from. Africa is a continent. India in itself is also like a continent with thousands of languages. They were forced to forget that, to adapt. Then there was the whole question of my grandmother. She just lodged herself in my heart she was like, just tell my story. I was not all bad. I was not an imperious, terrible woman. I had my heart broken. I wasn't allowed to play music. It was eventually, despite her privilege, she got broken by the patriarchy and actually her disintegration also resembled a disintegration of empire. As empire disintegrated in India, so did a lot of the families from the Raj, because the privy purse was taken away from them. And so it's a kind of memorial in a sense, but it's also a way of kind of looking deeply at a country that I now love, that is home to me and my family and my children and hopefully grandchildren one day. And it was like, what did these people do to us? And in the end, I saw that, especially even with my time with Walcott, was when he said to me, he said, why are you talking about these terrible privileged people? You're in the new world. You can rebuild it leaf by leaf. That's when I realized, this is much more than a memorial. This is a kind of way of my saying to Trinidad and Tobago how grateful I am that I was able to redefine myself and, become part of the Kalaloo that is Trinidad and Tobago, because I wouldn't be accepted in India as a half Muslim, half Hindu. But in Trinidad, every form of mixture is accepted because we are the new world. So I think it's both a memorial as well as a way of singing praise to my new land.
And both books feature that sense of patriotism and that idea of nationhood. As you mentioned Walcott era, I wanted to address that as well, because
Sure.
if these are very different books, and yet this is one thing they have in common. Both of the titles of these books come from Walcott poems, and in your case, Ira, Walcott makes an appearance in the book. Barbara, you have not only taken a line from that poem, Love After Love, and made it into your title. But as you've alluded to in your previous, what you just said, you've actually structured your entire book alongside a lot of the images and clauses of that poem. So, Barbara, tell me, how did that structure come to be? How did you decide, okay, not only am I going to tell my life story, but I'm going to structure it along the lines of this poem?
Well, long life is a very unmanageable thing. There was growing up, there was becoming an adult here, a student, teacher. I taught for 3 years before going away. There was the going away, there was the boyfriend here, there was leaving him behind, there was meeting somebody new, there was meeting a new family, adjusting to a new place, going to university, being completely alone. I left here absolutely alone to go away. Nobody went with me. I had never left Trinidad before. So it was stepping onto a new place as if I had discovered a new world, except it was a new world I had known before, from books, from film. How do you put all of that into a book? I'm not very good at literary theory, so I didn't plan things out in a sort of plotted way or anything like that. So I was very grateful that the poem gave some clues as to how you could look at a life. And I think I seized upon it, and it made it quite easy. What it did mean, of course, is that there were lacunae, there are spaces, there are gaps that are not in the poem and haven't found their way in the book. Maybe at some point I'll see what Walcott left out of the poem and why, and write something else using what's been left out. But quite a lot has been left out.
Oh no, but
I was grateful for that.
Quite a lot is contained in it. And Barbara, you claim to not be a literary theorist, but I think anybody who reads this book will appreciate how you stretch the syntax of the sentence to its limits, and it's incredible to read and to experience. Ira, what about you? You not only, you've not only have you named your book after a line from, I think it's the poem Dark August, but Walcott appears, you go into a lot of detail in relation to a weekend that you spend workshopping your memoir with him. And in a very interesting way, your account of that workshopping of this memoir with him becomes this counter commentary within your own book. So it's very, very sophisticated, but yet at the same time, of course, it's very bold to do this because Walcott is, within the Caribbean space, certainly, and all over the world, a household name and a huge figure. So were you fearful of writing about Walcott?
I think I was not fearful. I think I actually saw it as a kind of a duty because I had this epiphany when I was there. I saw that, he looked at my work. He's like, why are you writing about these people? He destroyed it in one sentence. He said, look at the new world. And he looked out at the ocean. It was like a switch turned on. And I was like, I have been looking at this beauty all my life. I may not have Muslim India or Hindu India, maybe forgetting Urdu or Hindi, but I have this. And I am now part of the new world, which is part of creating a new identity where people of all races, of strands of 5 continents have gathered, are percolating, people of every race, of every religion. And I get goosebumps when I think of that, because for years I'd been wondering, why is there no religious kind of revolt in Trinidad? Why is there no religious deaths? Why is there no deaths around, when there's an election? The reason is because the people who came to the New World left behind their atavistic hatreds. We, people from the old world, lost language, but what we did gain, I'm saying we, but people in the New World gained a blank slate, so to speak, to which to start again. So you left behind your old hatreds. You didn't have a 2000 hatred of Muslims, like perhaps what you see in India right now with Modi, which is very dangerous. I was also very aware of in India and Gujarat where, there, so many Muslims were butchered after after some Muslims, attacked a train with Hindus. So I think he helped me understand that actually this is enough, because I think up to that point you always think the past, the future, England, life is always elsewhere. But when I started looking at his books deeply and I looked at my own work, I was like, it's all here. The answer really has been here all the time. And he wasn't very well at that time. He was, I would guess, in his last years. And very much like Barry Mummy, oddly, like my grandmother, she was born in, of course, British India. Oddly, he and my grandmother seemed to have very similar characteristics. Like they were passionate about their art. My grandmother would wake up in the night and compose music. And I saw that in Walcott. He was passionate about the light, that he must get it right. He must see it. He must get the sentence right. So I think it was that. And I think I wanted to record it before it all went away.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about recording things, because Barbara, you very openly deal with all of the gaps in the stories around you. You have some very moving passages where you express certain regrets about not asking a question or asking someone to explain something, or there are areas in your life where you didn't get all the facts because it was simply something that people didn't talk about. And the book is very open about that. And that's part of its strength, because it embraces the fact that there are limits to our knowledge. And I was wondering, what do you think about this idea of storytelling in the Caribbean and this idea of the neglect of stories, specifically in Trinidad? Do we have a problem with preserving our stories? And do you see things like your book as perhaps one way in which we can, Ira, you use a phrase, you talk about redemption at one point in your book. Is this one way in which we can redeem ourselves by turning perhaps away from history with a capital H to a more personal gaze, and in that way keeping alive stories?
Right. This thing about storytelling and the tradition of storytelling in the Caribbean, I don't entirely agree that we don't have a tradition of it. Maybe we have a tradition in a different form. We have a tradition of calypsos, which tell stories of current events, tell stories that are amusing, sardonic, satirical. So we do have a tradition in that sense. And so through music, we have that kind of storytelling. Then there's oral storytelling too. What Ira said about her grandmother telling stories, I think a lot of families can relate to that. In my own particular case, however, my mother had 4 of us out of marriage and was in a way a little bit out of a family circulation. I didn't know very much about my ancestry. We don't go back hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. Maybe we do, but I just don't know about it. I had my ancestry done, and it was quite astonishing, the things that turned up that I never imagined, because I only know my mother's side. I have a huge proportion of South Asian that I knew absolutely nothing about. So that must have come from somewhere else. It didn't come from my mother's side. So storytelling in that way of family storytelling didn't happen. There were a lot of secrets around in my own particular family. And I think my mother was always preoccupied. She was always working to look after the 4 of us, so that we didn't have to sit down and talk about things. There were, as you said, so many occasions when I didn't ask. about things that I should have asked about. And when there was the one opportunity, I ruined it. When my mother came to visit, she lived in the USA for a lot of her life. She went there when she was 50 and died at 74. But when she came to visit, which was really very regular, my youngest daughter would always ask her about her life. And one day she got her to tell about her life and about her own mother's life.
Mm.
And my little girl, who was then 12, recorded it on a cassette and left it there. She went away to study, and I was in this house and I was clearing up. And I just threw out all the cassettes. So the one ancestry story that we could have had, I threw away. And it is such a point of great shame, more than embarrassment, that I could have been so casual about the one link that I could have had. That I don't know how I'd ever forgive myself, although my daughter has long forgiven me, I must say.
I'm sure when they read this book, I think they're gonna definitely forgive you because of the abundance of stories that you've assembled. But Ira, you have a line. You ask, you speculate in this book. You say, could this be the way to get through our brief lives, creating form, beauty, redemption out of menace and chaos? Is this something that you think you're doing by telling all of these stories now? Is this an act of redemption? You mentioned memorializing, but is it something else as well?
Oh, absolutely. And that's why I like the title of Love the Dark Days. And I want to say something about what Barbara just said. I think, Barbara, your throwing it away was no act of, was no, nothing that was careless, or it was actually something that ought to have happened. And in a sense that kind of reminded me of what Walcott was saying. He was saying, you may have gotten so attached to those cassettes, to the actual events, that your imagination may have been curtailed. And sometimes we do things that are actually good for us, and we let go of things that are you probably did something that was actually very positive for you. You freed up all that space to maybe reimagine events. And I think with a kind of intuition, that's what Walcott was always talking about, the kind of atavistic intuition that goes completely beyond, this is, I came from Bihar, or I came from, this, I came from Uganda, or I came from, this is where my family came from, this is the language. You're able to now claim all of it, right? You're talking about the South Asian aspect of it. Your imagination, I see that act as your imagination being freed. So I just want to put that on record, because I was so touched by what you said. And I understand the hurt you would feel at losing your mother's voice, but please don't. So in terms of redemption, I absolutely think that, and I've, in everything and every point of my life, and I think in every human being's life, I think when Walcott talks about the dark days, I think that dark days are beautiful too, because it take us through the whole gamut of what it means to be human. If one just had those light, superficial days where we dance them all away, there wouldn't be that. But I think that when you have all that depth, that we have all had those moments of sorrow, of weeping into our pillows when nobody's seen us. And I think out of that comes insight. And out of that comes empathy. And from empathy comes connection. So I actually believe loving the dark days is very, very necessary. And it's a rich, rich gift that allows us to go deep within ourselves and to salvage the hope that always, that's always there. I think there's always hope. And I think that we must see it like that.
Oh, that's wonderful. We're just going to take a break. We're going to share some more extracts shortly with the audience, but I wanted to ask both of you all a little bit more about, Ira, you mentioned, Walcott telling you to write about the now, write about the present, which is something a lot of us as writers empathize with, actually. I have a yearning, for instance, to see my Trinidad right now on the page, not just the past. So I wanted to ask both of you all about this antinomy and whether or not it's a false one. Because very often, when we're writing about the past, it's actually heavily resonant with what's going on right now. And that's certainly the case in Barbara, in your book. And you openly address this because even though you're dealing with life in the colonial era, under colonial rule and under the yoke of institutional religion, you ask a lot of important questions, I think, about Trinidad society today. So to what extent do both of you think that part of the project of what you have done is to show, well, yes, things have changed, but has it?
I'd let Ira go first this time.
Well, I think it was really important for me to write about the present, for me to understand the past. It's normally the other way around. So I spent quite a lot of time in prisons. Thanks to Debbie Jacob, I went to judge some of the competitions, the debate competitions. And then one day I asked Debbie if I could go in and speak to some inmates. I wanted to know, what is it that makes a man want to kill? What is it? Where does that rage come from? So I spoke to about 7 of them. At one point, the warden disappeared, and I thought, okay, they could actually kill me. But, oddly, I felt the safest in my life in that prison than I have ever done in Trinidad. Because I asked each of them, not what have you done wrong? I asked each of them about their most important childhood memory. And, one after the other, the memories came. One of, this grown man, he done terrible things to a baby, raped and killed a baby. And when you think about why, it was because when he was very small, his stepfather bullied him. He was made to sit on one of those, those graters until his knees were scraped. He got some of those homing pigeons as pets. And one day his stepfather sent him to the shop to get some cigarettes. And when he came back, all the necks of the homing pigeons were slit. And, you see that, and it's a cross race, so it's not of any particular, it's Indian and African. You don't see too many other races in the prison, unfortunately. Well, I shouldn't say unfortunately, but I guess that's our demographic. But I think I also saw very clearly what Derek was talking about. The past has had such an influence on the present. You can't take away a people and strip their language, strip where they've come from, divide up their families, brand them, write contracts that are, inconceivably brutal, treat them like animals almost, which is what happened during both indentureship and slavery, and then expect not for that trauma to get into the DNA of human beings. That trauma is something that I think that we are dealing with now. When you think about the crime in our islands now, yesterday, we've celebrated independence, 60 years of independence, but we are all deeply aware of the violence. And where does that come from? It does come from being colonized. It does come from being brutalized. And that brutality has entered our DNA. And that's why, I'm not African. I probably don't have a right to say it, but I'm a strong proponent of reparations. I'm a strong proponent of saying, these people, the colonizers need to acknowledge what they've done, not just plundered our islands of sugar and coffee and iron or whatever it is that and oil, but our psyches. They've plundered the psyche of people across the continent. And that is why it was really important for me to write about the present, because it is only when you take that present and you look at the breadcrumbs going back, you realize where that present comes from. And I am irritated, I'm in England now, even now, by the kind of subtle sense, that people of color, like myself or whatever, we're responsible for whatever goes on in the communities because we haven't worked hard enough or we haven't assimilated. No, it's because you've systematically destroyed so many colonized countries and so many colonized people. And that's why we need to look at the present. Sorry, I think I went on a bit.
I think after that, there is very little I can say, except that, no, that's okay. No, that's fine. You've expressed lots of sentiments that I share. with far more eloquently than I'm sure I would be able to. I did say a little bit in the book along those lines that people of color are stigmatized for doing nothing. I go into a pharmacy here. I'm in the UK too. I'm in London now. I go into a pharmacy and the security guard follows me with his eyes moving along parallel in every aisle that I go to. And then you know that people cross the road when black men, I am not seen as a threat, I'm seen as a possible shoplifter. That's as far as can go with somebody like me. I'm not a threat. People cross the road when black people are coming. But this morning, my son and I went to the bakery together. And oddly enough, he's tall, he's 6 foot tall, he's a young man. He looks as if he could, wreak some damage if provoked kind of thing, although he's quite slim. But everybody that we met, that we smiled at, smiled back. We went into a bakery and had a conversation of about 3 minutes with the baker. It was quite surprising. So there are little moments, little glimpses of that. But as I said in the book, to come back to what's in the book, after all that has been done to wreck the world, as you said, how many continents have been plundered, why is it that black people are blamed for the ills of the world? If there is any race that you should be running from, crossing the road to avoid, who is it? Who is it has wreaked more damage to the world than white men? So I am just endorsing what you said, Ira, with a little bit more. But my argument with colonialism was more to do with religion. I didn't go very much into the trauma of ancestral enslavement or indentureship. It was to do with religion mainly. I went to Catholic school. I taught in a Catholic school on leaving. And then many, many years later, as a graduate teacher, I taught in a Catholic school. And although the school was not run by the clergy anymore, the EU made sure that Ireland didn't have any surplus idle people to put into the clergy. They were now profitably employed doing real work. The school where I worked, in the Catholic school, nothing had changed. Nothing had changed about the way people were regarded. Nothing was changed about the patriarchy. Absolutely nothing. It was a boys' school. There were very few female teachers, and we were inferior. We knew we were inferior to the male teachers. As a matter of fact, it was once said to me that if there was an advertisement for a job and a male and a female of equal qualifications appeared, if the female was a bit better on some other count than the paper, they would give the job to a male because it was a boys' school. And it made me realize then that there was no hope for me in that school. So yes, it was religion. It was religion that I dealt with mainly as the oppressor, as the elephant in our room, our little island room. It was squeezing us out. So,
and interestingly, Irish nuns make appearances in both of these books as well, which I guess is emblematic of that all-pervasive presence of religion within our society. I'd like to invite both of you to share with us another extract from your work. Ira, let's have
Ira will go first, yes.
Well, why don't I ask Barbara, because I'm a terrible prevaricator. I'm absolutely not sure what I should read, so maybe Barbara could. Barbara, if you're more prepared, because you do look like you are.
Well, after the way the conversation has gone, I don't know whether to read a bit about school days and Catholicism and Irish nuns, or whether, since this is the second and last reading, since the first one was about departure, maybe I can read about arrival, coming back home.
Yes.
Sounds
Okay. All right. This is the first chapter in the book. It's called The Time Will Come, which is how Walcott opened that poem. I understand now what you saw when you looked at it. I followed your gaze as your eyes took in the white lettering on the two blue enamel street signs set at right angles to each other on a concrete post. The low wall curving round the two streets, the green twisted wire fence that topped it, the gallery that mirrored that curve, and the jutting bay room that anchored it on the right. The fretwork fringed porte cochere, the little oval blue enamel street number plate fastened to its front. The steeply sloping corrugated galvanized roof streaked brown red by time. The finials at Regents pointing fingers to the sky. At each feature, your eyes widening, your smile broadening. It is exquisite, exquisite. I didn't see exquisite. I saw an old-fashioned house, built of the wattle and daub we here call nugging. And wood too, wood floors, wood windows, wood partitions, everywhere wood, ordinary wood. A wood that looked solid until you touched it and your fingers felt no resistance, felt something thin, like paper, that you could punch through to reveal secret tunnels, branching and interlocking. A separate nuggin and wood kitchen shed outside, a separate wood latrine out the back. Everything about it shaming and shameful. It did not have the tiles, the solid concrete blocks, the glass, the everything everyone needed kitchen, proper facilities like a bathroom, a shower, a flush toilet. It wasn't the modern everything I'd aspired to when I lived there. Many years into the future, when we had not just the one, she straddling your hip that morning as we stood on the pavement of the corner of Reed Lane and Pelham Street, Belmont, but three little ones. Sundays would find you donning your wide-brimmed burgundy West Indies cricket hat, piling a chair, a tripod, and a camera bag into the car trunk. You'd be leaving home to troll through the streets of Belmont, Woodbrook, Gonzales, Laventille, Piccadilly, Cobo Town, and beyond in search of suitable subjects. On finding one, you would park, stand on the chair on the pavement and in the street, adding to your 6-foot height for a better view, and methodically document on film whatever you could of it, so that over time you had a record of perhaps 100 or more of those fast disappearing exquisite houses. I would, on those Sundays, recall that love at first sight moment when the future must have reached back in time to tap you on the shoulder, that day when you pronounced my childhood home exquisite. In the years before that day, those early years of our life together far away from here, I hadn't told you anything about the house where I grew up. I don't know why, but somehow it had never come up in conversation. Did it seem as odd to you then as it now does to me? After all, I knew your family home, and there must have been lots of opportunities for me to make comparisons or reflect aloud about my old home. But then again, there was so much about me, about my past, that I didn't talk about, that you didn't know about, even after the almost 9 years we'd been together. But that day you were there, and I was glad you could find out for yourself all that you had perhaps silently wondered about my old home and perhaps about me. The red concrete steps leading to the gallery, the green sweet oil tins lining the steps, were as bright as if Mommy had painted them that day before. But the palms standing in their tins, their branches withered brown and brittle, told a different story, a story of Mommy's absence. I marveled at how excited you were to be there, how much you wanted to explore, to see everything, anxious to ask me questions and get answers about the life of the house, my life in the house. But oh, how I now regret that I didn't try to match your enthusiasm. I felt heavy, as if the weight of the empty present and the too full past had seeped from the very pores of the house to fall on my shoulders, squeezing all vitality out of me, rendering me silent, dull. Is that my 3 minutes?
Thank you so much for that, Barbara. I mean, that's, for me, that is such. When I first read this passage, it was incredibly moving for me, because I thought, there's so much complexity, there's so much emotion, that so many of us in Trinidad know that house. We see that house in so many communities all over, and it is not just you rediscovering your home, or it is not just you realizing that you've taken for granted your home. It is you seeing your home through the gaze of someone else who loves you, and in that process seeing that person as well. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. Ira?
Well, can I say, Barbara, that was one of my most favorite passages, and I read that several times. I loved it. Loved the detail. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Eva. Thank you, and Andre.
So, I'm gonna read a little bit about when we arrived in Tobago, and my grandmother kind of colluded with Tobago. I stroke the smooth black cannon and look out at the dazzling ocean. I've never seen anything this bright. The sky, the sea, the air. Barimami reads the plaque. This fort was built by Sir William Hislop and named after King George III in 1804 to secure the colonial territory from foreign invasions and prevent internal revolts from the slaves. A heavy woman approaches slowly, her floral dress whipping around her legs. As she reaches the door, Mummy says, "Oh, look, it's Beulah. Thank God you're here." Beulah breathes heavily by the front door where we are now congregated. She looks Barimami up and down, then brushes past her with a "Morning." Enraged, Barimami opens her mouth to chastise her. Mummy whispers urgently in Urdu, "Don't say anything, mother. She won't like it." We look on aghast as Beulah sits at the table and serves herself breakfast. Barimami says in Urdu to Mummy, "This is unheard of for a servant in India." Mummy says dryly, "This is not India, my dear." Beulah, unaffected by our staring, calmly sets about consuming half a loaf of white bread and butter, washing it down with a fizzy orange soft drink mixed in with condensed milk. Mummy approaches her tentatively, sweat on her upper lip. "Do what you can, cook something and maybe dust after you've eaten," vaguely gesturing towards the kitchen and the bedrooms. Angel and I remain at the door staring until Beulah finally rises from the table and begins the housework at a stately pace. We have sandwiches for dinner. Mummy collapses on the stairs with the effort of folding her own saris. Barimami adjusts to the heat by wearing her thinnest saris, clipping a bed cover onto the curtains to block out the light, and drinking gallons of iced water, muttering about the lack of servants. "Beulah is no servant," she says sharply. For hours after Beulah has gone, I wonder how I should address her. I am as scared of her as I am of Barimami. Something builds up in Barimami and the Beulah wars begin. Barimami turns supervisor. "You haven't tucked in the lower sheet." Beulah sucks her teeth, ignoring her. Barimami thunders at Angel, Mummy, and me the following day, as if Beulah is not in the room. "You know she sweeps around the furniture instead of moving it. You can't take shortcuts, you know." This has no effect on Beulah, who sits down for a cup of tea and leaves the dirty dishes in the sink. Barimami starts washing them with exaggerated slowness. Instead of being shamed, Beulah allows Barimami to continue working. Barimami's voice turns increasingly polite and supercilious. "Would you mind, awfully, if you please, sweeping beneath the bed, if you have time, between your other important work, of course?" Beulah responds coolly, "I go see if I have the time." Come washing day, Beulah ruins several of Barimami's cotton saris by immersing them in bleach. My grandmother shoves them under Beulah's face. "Thank you. so much for putting these spots on my saris. You want me to put spots on all? Beulah responds. Beulah irons only once a week. Mummy accepts this rule. One stormy day, we return from school to a crisis. Bari Mummy has no more pressed saris to wear. She asks Beulah to iron one for her. Beulah refuses. I do iron when it rains, or when I wash, or when I get dew on me. Bari Mummy says, so when do you iron? Beulah says patiently, with due dignity, as if Bari Mummy is a half-wit. I can't iron after I put my hand in water. The hotness of the iron after the coldness of the water does make me sick. What rubbish. I ain't doing it. You have to. Mummy comes across them facing one another like warriors and says, please don't say anything, Mother. If you talk to Beulah like that, she'll leave and we'll have no one to do anything. I'll be left with everything. I can't cope. Beulah looks Bari Mummy up and down, moving her mouth as if chewing air, and says, watch me go. And call me when you learn some manners, okay? Mummy begs Beulah, please stay. Okay, but I'm not ironing today, and if that woman talks to me disrespectfully, I will box her. Beulah leaves early with a swagger and is absent for a week, after which she makes a smug return. Bari Mummy's battles with her intensify. We stand, as always, a hushed and enthralled audience. One evening, as she watches Beulah cooking, Bari Mummy says, must you put sugar in everything? The chicken, the beans, everything? Beulah stops and holds the ladle midair and throws it in the sink. I'm not cooking again. For weeks, the house is on tenterhooks. We eat more and more sandwiches. The end comes over raw chicken, which Beulah is cleaning. Bari Mummy grabs it from her at the sink and says she shouldn't touch it with bleach on her hands. The two women wrestle over the pink carcass until Beulah finally drops it disgustedly in the sink. Clean it up. Bari Mummy is at her most imperious. Beulah picks up the chicken slowly and drops it on the floor. What are you doing, you blackie? Beulah fixes Bari Mummy with a hard stare, straight up to the face. Who the hell you talking to like that, old lady? Who the ass you think you are? The Queen of Sheba? I black and proud. You ever hear what our beloved Prime Minister, the great Dr. Eric Williams, say? Massa day done. Go back to India or wherever the hell you're from. She gathers her things with a parting shot. Blasted coolie.
What fun.
Thank you so much, both of you.
Delightful. Utterly
Thank you.
delightful.
I think from that, it's quite clear that these books are also dealing with very, very hard and real truths. We have time for one final question, and I actually wanted to ask you all something that comes from a line from Ira's book. Ira, there's a moment where you say, I'm good at being an outsider. And I want to to close the conversation by asking you all about this. Earlier, we were just undermining this false dichotomy of past and present. And I think these two books quite clearly show how this idea of being an outsider, it can be derogatory sometimes, but it can be something that is indicates a weakness, but at the same time, it could also be something that indicates a strength. And sometimes you can be an outsider even within a system, and vice versa. So to what extent did both of you set out perhaps to challenge this idea of inside, outside, coming and going?
Well, I've always been an outsider because my father was in the Indian Army and we moved from city to city. And India, has many languages. So every state we moved in, we had to learn the new language of the state, plus Hindi, plus English. So, of course, I came last in my tests in every new state. I understood what it was to be an outsider in India because, even in the army, when people come together, they don't all speak the same language. So everybody speaks English in order to get along. So I understood even when I came to England to boarding school over here, the first thing somebody said, oh, look, there's a brown fairy in the room because I was the only brown girl in the room. And when I was in Tobago, I was the only Indian in the room. And actually, it's hugely liberating because it shows you in the end that human beings all are so much more similar than they are different. I may have gone to Tobago And, in Tobago, I asked one girl there, a tall girl called Debbie Oliveri, a red girl, saying, do you speak English? Because I didn't understand her Tobagonian when I first arrived. And she was like, who the ass you think you're, you blasted coolie, lifted me in the air. And then I was like, but I'm not a coolie because I don't lift loads at train stations. I was so literal that she was quite disgusted by me, but then we became really good friends. And I think what happens is that you realize that the little bits of cultural misunderstandings are just that. The rest is just about being human. And I think being an outsider allows you to see all of humanity and allows you to see more commonalities of the human heart and less about what people look like. So that's a kind of long-winded answer, but that's my answer.
Barbara, do you think being an outsider is a position of strength?
Oh, absolutely. I love being an outsider. I place myself in the outsider position. I think in Ira's case, it was because they moved about a lot. But society in Trinidad, when I was growing up, was really quite hierarchical. It still is, but there's a lot more mobility now, more opportunities to move up. But at the time, it was pretty rigid. So it gave me an opportunity to observe. Being an outsider, being not seen, even outside, allows you to pay close attention to what is around you and to internalize. It gives you the quiet space to think and work things out if you're not constantly engaged inside. And when I went away to Wales, to Aberystwyth, I was an outsider there too. But my first friend there was an American. And I discovered that Americans and Trinidadians had a common culture because we saw American movies. There was an American radio station, WVDI, when I was growing up. There were Americans everywhere. There was an American base until after I left. So that we have that common thing. And yet I was outside of her for very, very many reasons. She even said to me, and she was my best friend in the first year at university, that I was the first Negra, Nigra. She was from the South, she was from Louisiana, that she had ever spoken to. So we have this inside. I was observing her, I was listening to her. And with the other people at university, we were quite different. And I think I was there to understand and not to be understood. I didn't want to be understood. I just wanted to understand. And so the outsider position allowed that.
And perhaps, and perhaps, this ability to move from the outside in and inside out is one of the, if not the defining characteristics of Trinidadianness and of our nation. Just before we go, I just wanted to congratulate both of you on these wonderful books and to also ask, how do you feel having now written them? Because there are lots of emotions that must have been involved. I mean, they trigger so many different emotions in me as a reader. How did you all feel when you finished writing this book?
Barbara?
Well, when I don't print what I write on the screen. And I didn't see this on paper until it was like this. It's the first time I saw it on paper. And on reading it, I thought, but you didn't say anything about that. You didn't say anything about this. Why did you put that in about? Why did you leave that out? And because the process of writing was a fluent process, just writing without, as I said, any particular structure except to take odd nouns, verbs from Walcott's poem, dwell on that. And I felt there's so much more But I'm so, so, so glad that this is out there in the world now and not a whole amorphous mass running around in my head that had no concrete evidence of having existed at all. So I'm relieved and grateful, and I'm really grateful. People Tree Press, Hannah, Jeremy, thank you, thank you, thank you. They're the best in the business. Send them the manuscript and they say yes. What more could you ask for? So I just hope that enough people will connect with it also. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Well, I feel very similar to Barbara. And first of all, I really have to thank Jeremy Pointing and also Jacob Ross. I think between them, they're both the best editors in England. I really feel that. And Hannah runs that press. You know, I don't know, like a goddess. She's got about 20 hands. And it's amazing to be accepted by People Tree Press. I'm so proud and happy to be published by a Caribbean press. I feel very relieved, but I'll be honest with you, I'm kind of frightened to come home. I mean, I have it here, right? If my husband and my son are like, well, when are you coming home? Like, well, maybe just a couple more weeks in England, because I have written a very personal memoir, although it's written like fiction. And I am a little bit afraid. But mostly I'm relieved that it's done. My grandmother's not sitting on my heart like a stone, and it's out in the world, and I'm grateful it's out. Thank you. And Andre, I want to say to you that I've been following your work. I've been reading your poetry. You're literally one of the finest of the Caribbean, and I would say soon among, globally. So I'm just so grateful and proud to be in your company and in Barbara's company, because I've read all her books, and I think she was amazing. And I did kind of get her copy when I went to People Tree Press, and I did put it out on Facebook, and she was like, oh my God, you've seen it before me. So I just feel very privileged, very lucky, and very joyous to be in both your company today. Thank you so much.
Thank you both for this wonderful conversation. And thank you to our viewers for coming. We are now going. Goodbye, everyone.